responsible for corporate and investment banking, Citigroup India.
Pramit Jhaveri, thanks very much for joining us on the show. We're speaking to you at a time when everybody believes the environment is only getting worse from where we are. We are seeing deals happen at prices that nobody had heard of, especially since a lot is cheap in the US, so to speak. But has the environment actually deteriorated even for M&A when people would have thought this should be boom time?
There's no question that the period is, it is a slightly slowing down period. I mean, we're coming out of a period of what I would describe as, irrational exuberance. There has been a period of irrational exuberance which went on for some amount of time, and irrational exuberance leads to excesses. So I think there is a period of rationalization or consolidation, which frankly cannot be a bad thing for any of us. It can't be a bad thing for any of the stakeholders, and to some extent that will result in a slowdown in all of our businesses. But I like to think of it in just the same way corporate India thinks about it, because you have India that was growing at 8% for a few years, and the rest of the world was growing at 4%. Now the rest of the world is growing at 1 or 2%, and India is yet growing at 6% or 7%. So this is the same for our businesses. We've come off a period where our businesses have been growing at 50, 60, 70% a year for the last few years, and if that slows down a bit, that's fine. It's a period of introspection, and it's good.
But it's also, of course, post the time when everybody had it very good for themselves in terms of pricing deals and seeing that M&A in terms of figures and numbers was huge. But isn't this time to also think about the value or the growth story instead of just wondering if this is time for introspection?
Yeah, I think it is. It is. And when we talk to our clients, I think they're thinking exactly the same thing, that this is a time to introspect. This is the time to think about values. Should you be looking to do some of the things that you would have been looking to do 6 months ago? And I think you will find that people are obviously pausing for a breath. People are themselves reevaluating those situations. But I think from a longer term point of view, I think if things make sense strategically, our sense is that our clients are yet kind of very, very focused on those opportunities. I think when you look at the opportunities, you look at the aspirations, and you look at the appetite, I think the whole, notwithstanding the events of what's going on in the rest of the world, I think from a long-term point of view, it's very much intact.
So this whole argument about when it comes to deal making, that the opportunity and adversity is possibly not something that holds in the current world economic order.
Well, it's actually, it's a little bit of both, right? It's opportunity and adversity and opportunity, that the adversity might actually throw up some opportunities.
But is it as of now?
I think, as I said, people are pausing a little bit for a breath, because the events of the rest of the world are to some extent distressing. So it's not clear that you should go ahead all guns blazing.
But is this really the long-term correction that was awaited in some ways subconsciously by most on Deal Street?
I think as far as India is concerned, it is definitely a long-term correction that a lot of us have been talking about for some time. And
despite riding on it yourself?
Oh, you have to, right? That's what our businesses are. But you have to ride on the wave, and then you expect that the wave will correct at some point, and you have to be prepared for that downturn. And I think hopefully those businesses, like I'd like to believe ours, which is very well rounded and diversified. So it's not only M&A, it's equity raising, it's financing, it's leverage financing. So when you have a pretty well rounded portfolio of domestic and international businesses, then I think you're in a better position to ride a little bit of the downturn than others.
Right, that's your position. But if you look at the market, in terms of the amount that's already blown out from the financial system, in your assessment, being somebody who has gone there to raise funds for some of the large conglomerates here, do you think the things are still to unwind in a significant way?
Yes, I think they are. I think there is some more bad news to come as far as the rest of the world is concerned. And whilst I think we all agree that India will be more insulated than the rest of the world, it cannot be completely insulated. So I think there is some bad news to come. There is some belt tightening to come. And as far as the Indian financial services market is concerned, I've again subscribed to the view for some time that it is a little bit overbanked. There are more players than there is necessarily the size of the pie, and to that extent, if there is a correction, it is yet to be seen how some of these players will respond.
Yeah, I think we have more than our share of audience here. But all the same, like you said that, there is going to be a little more unwinding. On the other hand, when you just look at the regional growth stories, you've got India, Asia at one end, plus you've got the opportunity that's perhaps at this stage screaming in the US if somebody wants to go for it. Do you think Indian companies are better poised after the M&A and capital raising exercise of the last 2 years in a recession this time, purely from an M&A point of view?
Yes, I think the answer is yes, because if you look at Indian companies, if you look at their balance sheets over the last few years, I think you will yet find that by and large Indian companies are under-leveraged. So they are under-leveraged, even though the markets have corrected pretty significantly over the last few weeks. Indian companies yet trade at very healthy multiples.
But have you wondered in your M&A career as to why in the financial side we don't see such big acquisitions? We've been seeing it to a great extent in the manufacturing end from the Indian companies. IT perhaps never, because India is probably the cheapest market they could get. But the kind of action that's picked up in the international market, why hasn't India woken up to the financial opportunity?
I think there's two things. As far as Indian companies looking externally for opportunities as far as financial services is concerned, I think when you look at penetration levels and you look at the growth opportunity in India in financial services, there is yet just so much opportunity, and there is just such a huge wallet waiting there to be accessed. So I think Indian companies have been more focused on the domestic opportunity versus trying to get distracted with the international opportunity.
Is it truly a distraction? You think it's not time that they actually think of being global in the true?
You know what? I mean, we always talk about something and then the events of the next 12 to 18 months prove us wrong. So my sense is they're yet focused on the Indian opportunity, but as you said, if situations arise in the rest of the world where something suddenly becomes incredibly attractive or more attractive than it was, who knows? I mean, there are some very, very fine Indian institutions, they're large institutions, they have access to capital, and who knows? I mean, you might well see a salvo being fired anytime.
In your assessment, do you think that in terms of, the environment that's changing, that has cut down the ability for many of these companies to raise capital?
See, there is no question. I mean, if you look at the last 6, 8, 12 months, there is no question that the ability of businesses to raise debt or to lever their balance sheets for the purposes of M&A has been significantly constrained. Again, it's a consequence, I think, of some of the excesses that took place in the period before that. I think as far as Indian companies are concerned, we very rarely see Indian companies that do M&A as a consequence of money being available. So I think it's a question of, does this make strategic sense? Can I afford it? And is the capital available? Then we'll do the transaction. So I don't think it's kind of the tail wagging the dog, which has been the case in some of the larger M&A that has taken place globally. So to that extent, I don't think it's such a significant factor, but yes, I mean, the ability of, all capital is going to be constrained in the immediate future. So whether it's capital markets, whether it's bank markets, whether it's credit markets, and to that extent, if there was a large M&A that was predicated on large financing being raised, it will be impaired.
But does that make you sort of wonder, especially in hindsight after some of the impact on the international world has blown out to India, that some of the M&As that were done on highly leveraged balance sheets, does that actually leave people with a little more concern? Because cash flow that was very easy has also taken a hit.
It should. I think if you have situations where, too much or, onerous levels of leverage have been taken on in a scenario where a cycle could change or business cycles could change, that should have people concerned. But as I said, I think by and large Indian companies appear to be under-leveraged at this point. There is clearly some amount of limitation on how much capital you can raise at this point. Valuations have corrected, so people's desire to raise equity at these levels has changed. I think it takes some months for expectations to get reset in a sense.
But how have you taken to companies actually coming up with ideas, as would investment bankers themselves, with new products that have come into the financial market? And now as one looks at, various kinds of exposures that are there, some companies might have it, some may not, like derivative exposures, forex exposures. These were all kind of instruments that came up and made everyone excited about it. But it has sort of fallen flat on its face.
Yes, I think you have to exercise, very, very high levels of caution in this. At one level, I think we find here in India that the clients that we deal with are incredibly sophisticated relative to other markets. At the other level, you also have some very young businesses, emerging companies that are,